Alessandro Moretti did not enjoy these dinners. The food was always exquisite, the wine impossibly rare, the company obsequious to the point of suffocation. He sat at the head of the long table in the private room of La Perla, a restaurant he technically owned through 3 shell corporations and a very nervous man named Francesco. The men at his table laughed too loudly at jokes that were not funny. They spoke of shipments and territories, of betrayals and profits, their voices a low, greasy hum in the opulent room. Alessandro said nothing. He merely listened, his large frame perfectly still in the high-backed chair. His hands rested on the table, one on either side of his plate. They were clean hands, the nails immaculate, but they were thick and powerful. Hands that had built an empire from the rubble of his youth. On the back of his right hand, just below the knuckles, was a scar. It was a pale, jagged starburst against his olive skin. An old wound. A map of a single, terrible moment from a life he had buried long ago. His men knew not to ask about it. They knew not to ask about many things. It was the foundation of their long and profitable relationship. Marco, his loyal lieutenant for 30 years, stood by the door. His eyes, alert and weary, scanned the room, the hallway, the world. He was a statue of quiet loyalty, a man who had seen Alessandro's rage and his rare, almost non-existent, mercy. He knew the rules. The rules were simple. Business was business. Emotion was a liability. The innocent were to be left alone, not because of morality, but because they were a messy complication. They brought heat. They brought attention. Alessandro lived by his rules. They had kept him alive. They had made him powerful. Untouchable. A young waitress entered the room, her movements hesitant. She was new. He had not seen her before. She carried a silver tray with a bottle of water, her head bowed. She was a whisper in a room of thunder. Her uniform, a crisp white shirt and black trousers, seemed a size too large, as if she were shrinking inside it. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, severe knot. It made her look younger, more vulnerable. She moved down the table, her focus entirely on the task of refilling water glasses without disturbing the flow of masculine conversation. She was a ghost, trying to remain invisible. Alessandro watched her. It was his habit to notice everything. A flicker of an eye, a bead of sweat, a tremor in a hand. These were the tells. The cracks in the facade. As she reached the man to Alessandro's right, a brutish captain named Vico, he gestured impatiently without looking up. His arm knocked the bottle. The bottle tipped. Ice water cascaded across the polished wood, pooling near Alessandro's plate, soaking the pristine linen. A collective breath was held. The loud talk ceased. Vico froze, his face paling. An insult to the table was an insult to the man at its head. The girl let out a tiny, sharp gasp. Terror flashed in her eyes. "I am so sorry. So sorry, sir." She fumbled for a napkin, her hands shaking. Alessandro raised a single finger. A gesture. The room remained silent. Marco, by the door, did not move a muscle, but his posture tightened. The girl, desperate to fix her mistake, reached across the table to sop up the water. She grabbed a cloth napkin and dabbed frantically at the spill, her movements clumsy with panic. Her hand brushed his. It was nothing. A fleeting touch of skin on skin. But then she looked up, her eyes meeting his for the first time. They were grey eyes, wide and filled with a fear that was older than this single, clumsy moment. Her gaze dropped to his hand, to the water she was trying to clean. And she saw the scar. Her frantic movement stopped. Very still. Her own hand, the left one, was flat on the table beside his. On her wrist, peeking from the cuff of her slightly too long sleeve, was a scar. A pale, jagged starburst. Identical. A mirror. A ghost. The world, for Alessandro Moretti, tilted on its axis. The hum of the city outside, the breathing of the men in the room, the scent of expensive wine, it all vanished. There was only the scar on his hand and the scar on hers. a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for 45 years. She stared, her lips parted in disbelief. The terror in her eyes was replaced by a dawning, impossible recognition. A question she did not know how to ask. He saw it. He saw the memory flickering in her, a distant echo of smoke and screams. Alessandro Moretti, the man they called the Stone, the man who had not felt a tremor of genuine surprise in decades, felt his carefully constructed world fracture. He broke one of his own cardinal rules. He moved. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his hand over, palm up. An invitation. A question. A plea. The girl did not run. She did not scream. She lifted her trembling left hand and lightly, so lightly, touched the center of his palm with her fingertips. It was not the touch of a waitress to a patron. It was the touch of a survivor. A co-conspirator in a long-forgotten tragedy. The men at the table watched, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. Marco took a half-step forward, his hand twitching toward the inside of his jacket. Alessandro gave a faint, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Marco stopped. This was a break in protocol so profound, so alien, that no one knew how to react. The Stone was not Stone. He was something else entirely. Something no one in this room had ever seen. What happened in that silent moment was a conversation older than any business deal, more binding than any blood oath. It was a shared history, written in scarred flesh. And what was about to happen next would unravel everything Alessandro Moretti thought he knew about himself, about justice, and about the ghosts you can never truly outrun. It would force a choice upon him, a choice between the man he had become and the boy he had once been. Now, let us continue. Alessandro Moretti was a man built of secrets. His empire was founded on them, his reputation cemented by them. He was known as Alessandro the Stoner Moretti for a reason. He was impassive, unmovable, a force of nature that did not feel. It was a carefully cultivated lie, a suit of armor he had forged in the fires of his childhood. Those fires were not a metaphor. He was 10 years old, a ward of the state, living in the St. Jude's home for boys and girls. It was a grim, underfunded place, but it was all he had ever known. He had a name, Alessandro, but no family to attach it to. He was sharp, quiet, and fiercely protective of the younger children, the ones who could not protect themselves. One of them was a little girl. He did not remember her name. Just her eyes, big and grey, and the way she would follow him around the dusty yard like a small shadow. She was maybe 5. She couldn't speak much, a timid little thing who clutched a worn, one-eyed teddy bear as if it were the only anchor in a turbulent sea. He had called her Little Mouse. The fire started in the kitchen. A faulty wire, they said later. It spread with unnatural speed through the old, dry wood of the building. Smoke, thick and black, filled the hallways. Panic erupted. The caregivers, overwhelmed and terrified, herded children toward the exits. Alessandro had been in the small library, reading. He heard the screams. He smelled the smoke. His first instinct was not for himself. It was for her. Little Mouse. He found her huddled in her small room, clutching that bear, her face streaked with soot, tears carving clean paths through the grime. She was frozen in terror. "Come on," he had yelled, his boyish voice cracking. "We have to go." He grabbed her hand. It was so small in his. He pulled her through the chaos, down a back stairwell he knew was less crowded. The heat was immense. A ceiling beam, engulfed in flames, groaned above them. He pushed her ahead of him. "Go. Keep going." Just as she cleared the bottom of the stairs, the beam gave way. It crashed down in a shower of sparks and burning embers. He threw his arm up to shield his face. A piece of flaming debris, a chunk of wood with an exposed, red-hot nail, fell onto the back of his right hand. The pain was searing, absolute. He cried out. At the same instant, a smaller piece struck the little girl's wrist as she stumbled forward. She shrieked, a high, thin sound of pain and fear. He shoved her toward a broken window, the only way out. "Climb," he screamed. She was small enough to fit. He helped push her through the jagged opening. For a second, their eyes met through the smoke. Then, another section of the roof collapsed behind him, plunging him into darkness and pain. When he woke up, he was in a hospital. His hand was bandaged. They told him he was a hero. They also told him there had been casualties. Several children and one of the younger nuns had not made it out. They never gave him a list of names. In the chaos that followed, the surviving children were scattered to other orphanages, other foster homes across the country. He never saw Little Mouse again. He assumed the worst. He assumed she was one of the names on the list they never showed him. The scar on his hand became a memorial. A private monument to his first and greatest failure. It was the moment he learned that trying to protect people only brought pain. It was better to be hard. To be unfeeling. To be stone. He ran away from the next orphanage at 13, fell in with a street crew, and used his quiet intelligence and surprising ruthlessness to climb a ladder no one else dared to touch. The boy who protected the weak died in that fire. The man who emerged was determined to protect only himself. Until now. 45 years later, in a restaurant he owned, a ghost had touched his hand. The waitress, this woman with the same grey eyes and the same scar, was not a ghost. She was real. Her name, he learned, watching her from a distance, was Ilara. After the incident at the table, he had dismissed his men with a curt wave. He needed to think. He sent Marco to do one thing. Find out everything, he had commanded. The tone was quiet, but it held the weight of an avalanche. Marco, ever efficient, had returned within the hour. He found Alessandro sitting alone in his dark, cavernous office, staring at the scar on his hand. "Her name is Ilara Vance," Marco began, his voice neutral. 29 years old. No family. She works 2 jobs. The restaurant here and a diner in the mornings. She lives in a small apartment in the Narrows. Behind on her rent. Alessandro continued to stare at his hand. "She has some debt," Marco continued, sensing he should provide all details, no matter how small. Medical bills from a few years ago. An uninsured illness. She's clean. No trouble with the law. Keeps to herself. The restaurant, Alessandro said, his voice a low rumble. The owner. Marco hesitated for a fraction of a second. Silvio. He's not one of ours. A small-time operator. He leases the location. Francesco handles the contract. Silvio has a reputation. He's hard on his staff. Especially the women. Alessandro's jaw tightened. Hard how? He skims their tips. He finds them for things like a broken plate, a spill. The spill tonight, that would have cost her a week's pay, Marco explained. There are rumors of other things. Unwanted advances. Threats. Alessandro finally looked up from his hand. His eyes were cold, flat pieces of granite. She has been working for him for 6 months. 6 months of being ground down by a man like Silvio. A man who preyed on the desperate. A man who lacked any semblance of honor. She took the job because she had to, Marco added quietly. The hospital bills. Alessandro stood up and walked to the vast window overlooking the glittering, indifferent city. He saw the fire again. He felt the heat, smelled the smoke. He saw a little girl with grey eyes, clutching a one-eyed bear. He had pushed her through a window to save her from a fire, only for her to land in a world that burned people in slower, crueler ways. He had failed to protect her then. He had spent a lifetime believing she was gone, using her memory as the foundation for the fortress he had built around his heart. Now, he knew she was alive. And she was in trouble. The rules. His rules. Do not get involved. Emotion is a liability. The innocent are a complication. He looked at the scar on his hand. It was not a monument to failure. Not anymore. It was a promise. "Marco," he said, his back still to the room. "Boss? Tell Silvio I want to see him." "Here?" Marco asked, a note of surprise in his voice. To bring a man like Silvio here was a serious matter. "No," Alessandro said, turning from the window. A chilling stillness had settled over him. The impassive mask of the stone was back in place, but his eyes held a fire Marco had not seen in years. "We will go to him." "When?" Alessandro looked at his watch. It was almost midnight. La Perla would be closing soon. Silvio would be counting his stolen money. Now. The decision was made. It was not a business decision. It was not about territory or profit or respect in the traditional sense. It was older than that. It was about a debt, not of money, but of survival. A debt marked in scarred tissue. Alessandro sat in the back of his armored sedan, the city lights a blur of color through the tinted windows. He did not speak. He simply stared forward, his mind a quiet, cold place where a plan was taking shape. The boy who died in the fire, the one who tried to protect the weak, was stirring. And the man he had become, the fearsome and powerful Alessandro Moretti, was about to lend him his strength. This was not about rules. This was about closing a circle that had been left open for 45 years. He thought about Ilara. The terror in her eyes when the water spilled. The way she tried to make herself small, invisible. The deep, weary lines of exhaustion around her mouth. Life had been hard on her. He could see it. He could feel it in the brief touch of her hand. He remembered her as a child, a tiny thing who barely spoke. But she had trusted him. She had taken his hand in the smoke-filled hallway without hesitation. She had followed him. He had pushed her toward a chance at life, and then he had lost her. For nearly 5 decades, he carried that loss. It was a stone in his gut, a constant, low-grade ache he had learned to ignore. Now, the stone was gone, replaced by a burning, protective fire. Marco sat in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing at the rearview mirror. He saw the boss's face, set like concrete. He knew this was different. Usually, Alessandro's anger was a cold, controlled thing. A tool. This felt personal. This felt like something that had been simmering under the surface for a very long time. "Just you and me, boss?" Marco asked as they neared the restaurant district. 2 other cars, filled with his most trusted men, followed at a discreet distance. "Just you and me go inside," Alessandro corrected him. "The others will wait. I want this quiet. I want this clean." Marco nodded. He understood the language. Quiet and clean had very specific meanings in their world. It meant no witnesses, no loose ends, no chance for repercussions. Alessandro's internal conflict was not about whether to act. That decision had been made the moment he saw her scar. The conflict was about the man he was allowing himself to be. For decades, he had suppressed any hint of sentimentality. It was a weakness, a vulnerability that could be exploited. Love, compassion, nostalgia, these were luxuries for other men, for men who did not live with a target on their back. But what he felt was not just sentiment. It was a profound, primal sense of responsibility. It was the completion of a duty he had undertaken as a 10-year-old boy. The world had interrupted him, but it had not absolved him of the promise he made to that little girl in the smoke. He looked at his hand again. The scar seemed to pulse with a faint warmth. It was a part of him, a piece of his history he had tried to bury. But you cannot bury your own skin. He remembered something else from that day. As he pushed her through the window, she had dropped her one-eyed bear. It fell back into the burning room. He remembered the look of anguish on her small face, the loss of her only comfort. He had failed to save her bear. He had almost failed to save her. He would not fail her now. The car slid to a silent stop in a dark alley behind La Perla. The last of the kitchen staff were leaving through the back door, their shoulders slumped with fatigue. Alessandro and Marco waited in the darkness until the alley was empty. "He will be in his office," Marco said. "Upstairs. Counting the receipts." "He is counting his last," Alessandro said. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. He stepped out of the car. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of garbage and rain. He adjusted the cuffs of his immaculate suit jacket. He was not a thug coming for a shakedown. He was a force of judgment, arriving to balance the scales. The back door to the restaurant was locked. Marco produced a small, thin piece of metal. A few seconds of delicate probing, a quiet click, and the door swung open. They stepped inside. The kitchen was dark, save for the faint glow of a pilot light on one of the massive stoves. It was clean, but it smelled of stale grease and desperation. Alessandro could feel the residue of fear and anxiety left behind by the staff. He could almost hear the echoes of Silvio's shouted insults. They moved through the kitchen and into the main dining room. The tables were shrouded in white cloths, like ghosts in the moonlight filtering through the front windows. The opulence of the room felt obscene now. It was a beautiful facade hiding a rotten core. A faint light shone from under a door at the far end of the room, followed by the sound of muffled, angry muttering. Silvio's office. Alessandro paused. He looked at Marco. "Wait here." Marco's eyebrows shot up. "Boss, I don't think." "Wait." "Here," Alessandro repeated. The command was absolute. This was not a task for a lieutenant. This was personal. Marco swallowed his objection and nodded, melting back into the shadows near the kitchen door. He would obey, but he would be ready. Alessandro walked across the dining room, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the thick carpet. He reached Silvio's office and did not bother to knock. He simply turned the handle and pushed the door open. Silvio was sitting at a small, cluttered desk, hunched over stacks of cash and a ledger. He was a man in his 40s, with slicked-back hair starting to thin, and a soft, fleshy body that spoke of indulgence. He wore a stained silk shirt, unbuttoned to reveal a tangle of gold chains. He was exactly the kind of man Alessandro despised. A parasite. He was muttering to himself as he counted. "Stupid girl, cost me a bottle of San Pellegrino, that's another 20 out of her pay." He did not look up immediately. He assumed it was one of his late-night cleaning crew. "What? Can't you see I'm busy? Get out." Alessandro did not move. He just stood in the doorway, a large, silent shadow that seemed to suck all the light and air from the small, squalid room. Finally, Silvio sensed the quality of the silence. It was not the shuffling, subservient silence of his employees. It was heavy. It was dangerous. He looked up, his eyes widening first in confusion, then in dawning, stomach-churning fear. "Mr. Moretti," he stammered, scrambling to his feet, knocking over his chair in his haste. I wasn't expecting you. Is everything all right? Did Vico say something?" "The water spill, it was an accident, I assure you." "Sit down, Silvio," Alessandro said. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it cracked like a whip in the small room. Silvio, trembling, righted his chair and sat on the very edge of it, his hands fluttering nervously. Of course, of course. Can I get you something? A drink? I have a very fine brandy." "I am not here for a drink," Alessandro said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. The click of the latch was deafening. "I am here to discuss one of your employees." Silvio's face registered a brief flicker of confusion before settling on a mask of oily relief. "An employee?" "Of course. Anyone you want." "You want them fired? Hired?" "Just say the word, Mr. Moretti. My business is your business." "Her name is Ilara," Alessandro said. The name hung in the air. Silvio's relief evaporated. A new kind of fear, mingled with a greasy possessiveness, entered his eyes. "The waitress? The clumsy one?" What about her? Did she complain? She's a liar. Whatever she said. She has said nothing, Alessandro interrupted, taking a slow step toward the desk. I am not here because of anything she said. I am here because of what I saw. He placed his right hand, palm down, on the cluttered desk, scattering receipts. The scar was stark and white under the single desk lamp. I saw that you are a man who finds a frightened girl a week's wages for a spilled bottle of water, Alessandro said, his voice dropping lower. I saw that you are a man who preys on those who have no one to defend them. Silvio licked his dry lips. Sweat beaded on his forehead. It's a business, Mr. Moetti. Rules. Discipline. You of all people should understand that. I understand rules, Alessandro said, leaning forward slightly. The movement was menacing, predatory. My rules are about honor. About strength. Your rules are about cruelty. About profiting from weakness. We are not the same. He gestured to the ledger on the desk. You skim her tips. It's a service charge, Silvio stammered. You threaten her. I just motivate her. To do better. Alessandro was silent for a long moment. He looked around the cramped, pathetic office, at the stacks of ill-gotten cash. He looked at the sweating, terrified man in front of him. This was not a lion. This was a hyena, a scavenger who fed on the scraps of other people's misery. Tonight, Alessandro said, his voice now a blade of ice, a glass of water was spilled. An accident. It frightened one of my guests. It upset the pleasant atmosphere of my dinner. That is a business problem. He leaned closer, his face inches from Silvio's. But you, Silvio. You are not a business problem. You are a stain. You are a man who lacks honor. You bring disrespect not to my table, but to the world. And that is a personal problem. I don't understand, Silvio whispered, tears of fear welling in his eyes. What do you want? Money? You can have it all. Take it. I don't want your money, Alessandro said with disgust. Your money is dirty. What I want is to teach you a lesson. A permanent 1 inch. He straightened up. Ilara Vance no longer works for you. Effective immediately. You will pay her everything you owe her, everything you have stolen from her, and a year's salary as severance. My man Marco will present you with the figure. You will pay it in cash. Tonight. Silvio nodded frantically. Yes, of course, anything. And then, Alessandro continued, his voice utterly devoid of emotion, you will close this restaurant. You will sell the lease. And you will leave this city. You will not work in this industry again. You will not be in a position to mistreat another young woman again. Do you understand me? A flicker of defiance, of outrage at losing his little kingdom, sparked in Silvio's eyes. But this is my life. My business. It was the wrong thing to say. Alessandro's hand shot out and grabbed the front of Silvio's silk shirt, hauling him halfway across the desk. The gold chains dug into Silvio's soft neck. You have no business, Alessandro snarled, his face a mask of cold fury. You have no life. Not anymore. You are a ghost. You will take my generous offer and disappear. Or you will simply disappear. The choice is yours, but you will make it in the next 5 seconds. He held the terrified man suspended, their faces inches apart. He could smell Silvio's fear. It smelled like cheap cologne and failure. Yes, Silvio choked out. Yes, I understand. I'll go. Alessandro held him for a moment longer, then dropped him. Silvio collapsed back into his chair, gasping and clutching at his chest. Alessandro turned and walked to the door without a backward glance. He opened it. Marco was there, his expression unreadable. Marco, Alessandro said calmly. Help Mr. Silvio with his accounting. Make sure he understands the terms of his retirement. Yes, boss, Marco said, stepping into the office as Alessandro stepped out. The door closed. Alessandro heard a muffled sob from inside, quickly cut off. He did not need to know the details. He knew Marco would be thorough. The problem of Silvio was being permanently resolved. The stain was being erased. He walked back through the silent, ghostly dining room. He felt no satisfaction. No thrill. Just a quiet, resolute calm. He had used the power he had amassed over a lifetime of violence and intimidation not for profit, but for a purpose he was only just beginning to understand. He had recontextualized his own monstrous nature. Tonight, his capacity for ruthlessness was not a sin. It was a tool for justice. He stepped out into the cool night air of the alley. The two other cars had pulled up, their engine silent. His men, shadows in the darkness, waited. He had dealt with the antagonist. Now, he had to face the catalyst. He got into the back of his car. "Where to, boss?" the driver asked. Alessandro gave him the address to a small apartment building in the Narrows. Ilara's address. The reunion was the most difficult part. He found her sitting on the steps of her run-down apartment building, her shift having ended an hour ago. She had not gone inside. She was just sitting there in the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, her coat pulled tight around her, staring at her own left wrist. At her own scar. She looked up as his long black car pulled to the curb. Fear, sharp and immediate, flashed across her face. In her world, cars like that only meant trouble. He got out alone. He told his driver to wait. He approached her slowly, as one might approach a frightened animal. He was not wearing his suit jacket now, just his shirt and trousers. He wanted to appear less intimidating, but he knew it was a futile effort. He was who he was. "Ilara," he said. Her name felt strange on his tongue. She scrambled to her feet, clutching her worn handbag to her chest like a shield. "What do you want?" "I don't have any money. If it's about the water, I'm so sorry, I can pay for it, I promise." "It is not about the water," he said gently. He stopped a respectful distance away. "You do not need to be afraid of me." A hollow, bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Everyone should be afraid of you. I've heard the stories. Some stories are true," he conceded. "Some are not." He took a hesitant step closer. "The restaurant. La Perla. You do not work there anymore." Her face fell. "He fired me. I knew it." Because of the spill, a despair washed over her features, so profound it was a physical blow. "No," Alessandro said quickly. "Silvio did not fire you. You quit. And he gave you a generous severance." He held out a thick envelope. "This is yours. It is what he owed you. And more. A great deal more." She stared at the envelope, then back at him, her eyes filled with suspicion and confusion. "Why? Why would you do this?" "Silvio will not be bothering you, or anyone else, ever again," he said, ignoring her question. "That is a promise." "But why?" she insisted, her voice trembling. "This money. It's more than I've ever seen. I can't accept this." "Yes, you can," he said. "It is yours by right." He needed to tell her. He needed to bridge the gap of 45 years of smoke and fire and silence. "St. Jude's home," he said, the words feeling like stones in his mouth. "A fire. A long time ago." Her eyes widened. The suspicion began to melt, replaced by a dawning, fragile hope. "The boy, the one who... I pushed you through a window," he finished for her. He held up his right hand, showing her the scar under the streetlight. "I thought you were gone. For 45 years, I thought you were gone." Tears welled in her eyes. Not tears of fear, but of recognition. Of grief for a shared past. "I thought you were gone, too. They told me a boy died." "A boy did die that night," Alessandro said, his voice thick with an emotion he had not allowed himself to feel in decades. He was reborn as someone else. Someone harder. She took a shaky step toward him. Slowly, she reached out and traced the scar on his hand with her fingertip. Her touch was featherlight. I remember you were holding my hand. And the bear. I dropped my bear. The mention of the toy, a trivial detail, a child's lost comfort, broke something open in him. I am sorry, he said, the words raw. I could not save it. You saved me, she whispered. That was enough. They stood there for a long moment in the quiet street, two survivors bound by a matching pair of scars. The powerful Mafia boss and the struggling waitress. In that moment, they were just Alessandro and Ilara. The boy who saved the girl, and the girl who was saved. This money, she said, looking at the envelope he still held. I don't understand. This isn't a payment this isn't from him, is it? The money is from me, he said. Consider it back pay for the 45 years the world has been cruel to you. It is a start. A new beginning. She finally took the envelope, her fingers brushing his. But what do you want from me? It was a fair question. In her world, in his world, nothing was free. Everything had a price. I want nothing, he said, and he was surprised by how true it was. You gave me something tonight. Something I thought I had lost forever. What? She asked, her brow furrowed. A chance, he said simply. A chance to finish what I started. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She looked from his face to his hand, to the scar that matched her own. People say you are a bad man, Mr. Moretti. She paused, then asked the question that hung in the air between them. Are you? He looked at her, at the grey eyes he remembered from a lifetime ago. He saw the resilience there, the spark that a hostile world had failed to extinguish. He thought of Silvio, of the cold, clean resolution Marco was finalizing. He thought of the rules he had broken, and the one, single promise he was now keeping. I am what I need to be, he answered, his voice soft. But tonight, because of you, I got to be the good guy. It was the most honest thing he had said in years. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, stark white business card. It had no name, no company logo. Just a single phone number, printed in black. If you ever need anything, he said, pressing it into her hand. Anything at all. You call this number. It will find me. That is my second promise to you. She closed her hand around the card. Thank you, she whispered. Alessandro. Hearing his name, his real name, from her lips was like rain after a long drought. He nodded, gave her one last, long look, and then turned and walked back to his car. He did not look back. He did not need to. A circle was closed. A new one had just begun. 1 year later. The bell above the door chimed a cheerful little tune. The scent of fresh bread, of cinnamon and melting butter, filled the small, sun-drenched shop. It was called the Little Mouse Bakery. Ilara stood behind the counter, wiping it down with a clean cloth. She wore a simple white apron, dusted with flour. The weary lines on her face were gone, replaced by a quiet contentment. A genuine smile touched her lips as she greeted a customer. She laughed easily now. The fear was gone. She was no longer a ghost. She was a fixture in this small, quiet neighborhood. The locals loved her. They loved her pastries, but more than that, they loved her gentle kindness. She still had the scar on her wrist. But now, when she saw it, she did not see a memory of pain. She saw a promise. A connection. Across town, in a penthouse office that overlooked the entire city, Alessandro Moretti sat behind a vast mahogany desk. The business of his empire continued to churn around him. Shipments arrived, money was counted, enemies were watched. He was still the stone. Still feared. Still respected. But something was different. On the corner of his otherwise immaculate desk, next to a photograph of his late wife, sat a small, framed object. It was not a photo. It was a receipt. The first receipt from the first sale at the Little Mouse Bakery. For a single loaf of bread. She had insisted on mailing it to him. It was his memento. A reminder. Sometimes, Marco would come in and see the boss staring at the small, framed receipt, a faint, unreadable expression on his face. Marco never asked. He knew it was connected to the night they visited Silvio. The night the boss broke all his own rules. The night, Marco suspected, the boss had found a piece of himself he thought was long dead. Alessandro picked up the frame. He ran his thumb over the glass. He had given her a new life, a safe harbor from the storm. But she, in return, had given him something far more valuable. She had given him back a piece of his own history, a piece of his soul. She had reminded him of the boy he was, the boy who believed in protecting the innocent. He had not seen her in person since that night on her doorstep. They spoke on the phone sometimes. Brief, quiet conversations. He would ask if she needed anything. She would say no, but thank you. She would ask how he was. He would say he was fine. The words were simple, but the meaning beneath them was vast. It was a bond forged in fire and reinforced by a quiet, unwavering promise of protection. He was still a man who lived in a world of shadows and violence. He was no saint. He was not a good man, not in the way the world understood it. But he was learning that good and bad were not so simple. They were choices. And sometimes, after a lifetime of making the hard choices, you get a chance to make the right one. His scar no longer felt like a brand of failure. It was a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, you can be a light for someone else. It was a reminder that you can save a life, and in doing so, you might just save your own. True strength is not found in being untouchable, in being made of stone. It is found in the courage to feel, the willingness to protect, and the quiet grace of keeping a promise, even if it takes 45 years. Kindness is a currency that never loses its value, and sometimes, the most profound connections are written not in words, but in the silent, shared language of scars.